The Doppelgänger and the Unseen Reflection. There once lived a man named Richard. He was a loving husband, a doting father, and a respected employee at a local law firm. His life was as ordinary as it could be, a beautiful house in the suburbs, where he belonged to a prestigious homeowners association, tried his best to be present for all of his kids' extracurricular activities, and was well respected amongst his colleagues at work. Until one day, he met a man who looked exactly like him, a man he would come to know as his doppelganger. Richard was walking down the street when he saw a man who looked exactly like him. He was taken aback by the uncanny resemblance. The man introduced himself as Robert. Richard found this encounter intriguing and asked Robert if he'd be interested in a cup of coffee at a nearby cafe. They laughed, shared stories, and marveled at their striking similarities. Richard thought of it as a unique coincidence, a story to tell his friends and family about the day he met his twin who resembled him perfectly in every way and even had a similar sounding name. By the end of their sit-down, the two men exchanged business cards. Both men seemed impressed that the other was a lawyer, and also astounded that they had never ran into one another or even heard of each other before. The men shook hands, promising to stay in touch, and went their separate ways. When Richard got home to his wife, he told her about the man. He nicknamed the twin, and with a coy look in her eye, his wife remarked that the stranger he was met was more of a dead ringer than an actual twin. Not wanting to have to stand being corrected, he held a finger up, and stated, "Darling, I believe the scientific term you're looking for is doppelganger." His wife scratched her head, then shook her head. "No baby, a twin is your biological sibling who looks exactly like you. A dead ringer is a stranger you've never met who looks exactly like you, and doppelganger, well, you see, a doppelganger is you." A brief silence passed between the two, and Richard just shrugged and exited the room. Over the next couple of weeks he managed to stay in touch with Robert, sending him texts and memes that he would come across on social media, that he found entertaining. Never once thinking to look up any of Robert's social media presences. However, as the days passed by, things started to change. Robert began to show up at Richard's workplace, introducing himself to all of his co-workers. He would appear at his children's school to pick them up and drop them off at Richard's home, the children never knowing that it wasn't their father that had picked them up, and once at his house with the wife and kids he would stay there till Richard got off from work. He was always there, mirroring Richard's life. Richard's initial fascination turned into unease. He felt as if Robert was trying to steal his life. One day, Richard came home to find Robert sitting at his dinner table, laughing with his wife, Emily, and their children. Emily could see the unease on her husband's face, got up from where she was sitting, and when she got to Richard she whispered, pointing at Robert, "I'm sorry I called him your dead ringer, baby. That man sitting over there is you in every way, just with a different name, and a slightly more charming and outgoing personality." Robert really pays attention to the finer details in life. You could stand to learn a thing or two from him. Richard's life started spiraling out of control. His friends and colleagues began to treat him differently, as if he was the stranger. His children started calling Robert Dad. Richard felt like an outsider in his own life. One day as he was coming home from work he saw Robert's car parked in the driveway. It was Lincoln Town car just like his, only instead of being black it was white. Richard entered his home, intent on confronting Robert about how he was encroaching in on his life. As he entered the house an eerie silence passed through the home. It was too quiet. Richard made his way upstairs to the bedroom, and upon entering he was horrified to see Robert and his wife Emily, making love in their bed. Outraged at the sight before him, he yelled out, "What the fuck is going on here? Get off her." He threw his suitcase at the two of them and grabbed Robert off of his wife, throwing him down to the ground. He picked up a lamp to use a bludgeoning tool. Emily screamed, "Richard, no. You don't understand, he is you. He smells like you, tastes like you, his cock is even the same size as yours. He's just more tender and loving." Richard dropped the lamp, and gasped and whispered in disbelief, You wanted this? He wasn't raping you?" Emily had tears streaming down her face. "No, he wasn't. I wanted to know what it would feel like." "Richard, he's you, just better. I think you need to come to terms with that." She got out of the bed wrapping the sheets around her, and exited the room into the bathroom. Robert stood up in all of his nakedness, and smirked, saying, "You should have appreciated your life when you had the chance." Desperate, Richard ran out of his home and sought help from the police, but they dismissed him as a delusional man. He felt helpless, watching his life being stolen from him. He decided to gather evidence against Robert himself. One day, Richard came home to find police cars outside his house. Emily was crying, and the children were scared. The police arrested Richard, accusing him of embezzlement. Richard was shocked. He had never stolen a penny in his life. Emily looked at him with fear and disgust. She told the police that she had found evidence of Richard's crime in their home office. Richard was devastated. He realized that Robert had framed him. He pleaded his innocence, but no one believed him. He was sentenced to prison, while Robert continued to live his life. In prison, Richard was consumed by despair. He felt betrayed by his wife, his children, and his friends. He felt like a ghost, forgotten by the world. But he refused to give up. He started to plan his escape. One night, Richard managed to break out of prison. He returned to Bakersfield, determined to expose Robert. He sneaked into his own house and found Robert sleeping in his bed, with his arms wrapped around his wife. Richard turned the lights on to confront the sleeping couple, demanding the truth. Robert laughed, admitting that he was a doppelganger, a supernatural being who steals lives. He had chosen Richard because of his perfect life. He had convinced Emily to frame Richard, claiming that Richard was a danger to their family, and that if she didn't do something their whole family would succumb to despair, thanks to all of Richard's toxic traits. He went on saying that Emily didn't deserve to raise 2 children by herself and that he was the best solution to the problem at hand. Richard was filled with rage. He attacked Robert, but the doppelganger was stronger. Robert was about to kill Richard when Emily screamed, "Robert, no. You'll just wind up in prison." Robert knocked Richard unconscious, then explained to Emily that this was the only way, that Richard was the escaped convict who had broken into their home and attacked the 2 of them in their bedroom while they were sleeping. He stood up, caressed Emily's face and kissed her and whispered, "Darling, it's the only way. We tried framing him and getting him sent to prison to get him out of our lives, and that didn't work. Only way we're getting rid of this motherfucker is to kill him, and tell the authorities that it was in self-defense." Emily once again started sobbing. "What about the children? How will we explain it to them?" Robert hugged Emily, and said in a comforting tone, "Darling, they already call me daddy, and think it was my long-lost twin brother that was arrested. We just continue with that lie. It's in their best interests if you want them to grow up to be successful." Emily was torn. She looked at Robert, the man she had come to believe to be her husband, and then at Richard, the man she had helped frame accused of a crime. Robert unplugged the lamp from the nightstand and handed it to Emily. Emily stepped back, shaking her head. "Me? Why me? You're the man, you do it." Robert tightened his lips along with his stare and stated, "Darling love, I gotta know that you're all in. Just think of the children." He then offered her the lamp again, and as she reluctantly accepted it, Richard began to come to. He looked up at Emily, and cried, "Emily, what are you doing? I'm your husband." Wiping a tear from her already soaked cheeks, she calmly replied, "No, Richard, you've been replaced. You're just the criminal intruder who attacked me and my new husband Robert." Richard tried to climb to his feet, but was unable to, due to Emily jumping on top of him, delivering several blunt force trauma blows to his head. Once he was dead, Robert instructed her to give him a good blow to the head so that the self-defense claim would be more legitimate. The police were called, and when they arrived, Richard's lifeless corpse was taken away by the coroner. Emily and Robert explained everything, and the police started an investigation. An investigation that once checked out would drop all charges against Emily and Robert for murder or any other wrongdoing. Richard's encounter with his doppelganger had left him dead as a convicted felon lying cold on a metal slab in a morgue. He had lost his everything. All the people in his life that he ever loved now gave that love and admiration to another man. In the end, Richard's story serves as a chilling reminder of the dangers of envy and deception. It was a tale of a man who met his doppelganger, an entity who too stole his wife, children, job and entire life. It was a tale of fear, betrayal, and loss. It was a tale of the unseen reflection.